Welcome everybody. My name is Jos Bergman and I'm working for Technology2Enjoy as a PeopleSoft consultant. And I would like to give you a short demo about PeopleSoft forms. What are PeopleSoft forms? PeopleSoft forms enable you to create online forms to reduce the use of paper. This will help your organization becoming paperless. Forms can be mapped to a component interface to import data into PeopleSoft. You can submit forms for approval, which also provides an audit trail for tracking purposes. When a form has been created and saved, it automatically creates the approval process definition. In the live demo, we're going to create a form. We're going to define prompt records so that users can select and click on a lookup while entering data to select values through a lookup. We're going to map the form to a component interface so that we can import the data into PeopleSoft. We're going to fill out the form as a user, and then we're going to approve the form as a manager and then submit it to PeopleSoft. Let's log into PeopleSoft to start with the demo. I've created a navigation tile myself regarding the forms setup pages, and in this navigation tile I've included some shortcuts to pages for the setup, so it makes it a bit easier for this demo. Then I don't have to browse through all the menus. So let me click on the navigation tile here, and before you create a form, you first have to select any of the prompt records that you want to use. Suppose you want to use lookups on the form where users can select values, then you have to define prompt records before creating the form. So I'm going to open up the prompt record page, and here you can see the prompt records that I've selected. These are predefined prompt records in PeopleSoft, pre-delivered, and I'm just adding them here so that we can select them when creating a form. As you can see here, I've added the prompt record for business units so that the user can click on the lookup to select the business unit. I've also included a prompt record for the integration template and a prompt record for the project type table so that the user can select the project type while clicking on the lookup. And so that's the first thing you got to do if you want to make use of lookups, that you have to define your prompt records first before creating a form. So now let's take a look at a form I have already created. For the sake of time, I have already created a form. We're going to take a look at it, and we're going to modify it slightly to include an extra field. And then you get an idea how to create and modify forms. So I'm going to open up a new window. Let me go to the home page again and click on the tile Design Forms. Here you can see the project that I've created. Here you can see the form that I've created. I've given it the label project form because we will enter data in a form to create a project in project costing. Forms are also a great way of simplifying your data entry. Much of the data entry has already been automated, such as scanning of invoices, such as scanning of invoices with OCR technology. That's already been around for a long time. But there will always be some data entry left. And so forms are also a good way of simplifying the data entry for users. And in this particular example, I've created a form to fill out the data necessary to create a project in project costing. Let's take a look at the project that let's take a look at the form that I've created by clicking on the Edit button. And it opens up the form designer, and here you can see that it takes us through 5 steps to create a form. And on the first step, we can enter a label and a description. We can enter an effective date from and to, and we can also change the tile image. Let's go to the next step. And on the next step, we see the actual form that I've created. On the left side, you see your widgets, the fields that you can that you can drag and drop on the into the form. And for example, if I click on as you can see, I've added business unit, project ID, project start date, end date, description, and integration. That's the integration for GL. It's a field that's required in project costing. So these are the fields that I've added to the form to submit data necessary to create a project in project costing. Once you drag a field or a widget here into the form, you can give it a label. So for example, the business unit field, I've given it a label. I've given it a field length. I've set it to required because the business unit has to be filled out. And I've also added a prompt record so that the user has a lookup where he can select a business unit from the lookup. And I've also added, as I said, other fields, project ID, etc. Project ID is the same principle where I've given it a label, project ID, put in a field length, and make it required. This is the project ID field. I've made it. It's a text field, so users can enter pretty much anything they want. I've set the field length to 10. I believe the field length in the database for project ID is 15 or 20 characters. Make sure that you don't exceed the length. The length of the form field shouldn't exceed the field length in the database of the field that you're entering data into, because then the component interface will fail when you submit the form. So always make sure that you don't exceed the length of the field in the database that you're inserting data into. Let's let's modify the form, and let's add another field to it. And let's see here. I would like to add the project type to the form so that the user can also select the project type when filling out the form for the creation of a project. So let's drag, and I want it to be a prompt field so that the user can also select prompts. So that the user can also select project types from the prompt. So I'm gonna drag a prompt widget to the form like this, and we can give it a label, for example, project type, and the The length is set to 5, which matches the you've got some length values that you can select. The label project type, the field project type in the database is 5 characters long, so I'm making it 5. And I don't have to make it required because it's not a required field when entering a project. I'm going to select the prompt record so that the users can select the project type from the lookup. So here's the prompt record, project type table. And remember, these are the prompt records that we have defined here in the setup, as you can see. So I'm going to select it here, and I'm just going to put in a set ID, share. And then I will save it. Now at this point, I can still delete the field, the form field from the form if I want to. Once I've activated the form, I cannot delete any fields anymore because the system assumes that the form is being used by users and data is being filled out in the form. So that's why it prevents you from deleting fields from the form, because it could have a destructive impact on the data if you delete fields. So once it's been activated, you cannot delete fields anymore, but you can add new fields to the form if you want to. If you need to completely restructure the form, it's better to start over and create a new form instead. As you can see, you can also change the device for the device layout, or the device viewing. I'm currently looking at the form in tablet landscape mode. Since Fluid can be used on all devices, you can also see what the form looks like on various devices. So if I go to this is what it looks like in tablet when you have it in portrait mode, and this is what it looks like on a smartphone, and this is what it looks like on a desktop. And in that way, you can see what it looks like on all the devices, because Fluid works on all devices. So so I'm happy with this actually. So now let's go to the next step. And here we can enter instructions for the user, and fill out instructions on how they should fill out the form and what they should pay attention to. You can put that here. And in the fourth step, you can actually enter your approval user list so that you can have the form go through the approvals. Once you submit a form as a user, it will go into the approval workflow, and a person can approve the form and submit the data to PeopleSoft, or submit or approve a form request. You don't have to import data into PeopleSoft. You can also create forms without inputting the data into PeopleSoft. You just have a record of the forms that you have entered out. The data is still in the form, but you don't have to submit it to PeopleSoft if you don't want to. In that way you can also digitalize and create electronic forms, and the forms are saved in PeopleSoft, so it reduces your physical paper. So here you can select your approver user list for the approval workflow, and once you can choose a lockdown option. In this case, I've chosen to lock down the form after I submitted it, so that you cannot change it anymore. You cannot change any of the data entered anymore because it's been submitted for approval. You can also leave it unlocked, but I decided to have it locked after submission. Then I go to the next step. This is the last one, the security step. Here you can give security authorizations to specific security authorizations for users accessing the report, or sorry, accessing the form, um, and accessing and approving the form. There are some other roles that you need to enter to a user profile. They are pre-delivered security roles. They start with EOFM, Enterprise Object Forms, EOFM. You have a user role, an admin role, and a design role. And those also have to be added to your user profiles. Whether EOFM user, EOFM admin, or EOFM designer. Um, but that's all mentioned in the people books for further reading. It's described in great detail in the people books. In this case, I've given only one role, Vice President, which is matched to VP1, the user ID VP1. I'm going to click on Activate. And now my form is activated. But remember, we added one field, one more additional field to the form, which was the project type. And I've mapped it to a component interface because I want to import the data from the form into PeopleSoft. So we need to map one additional field in the CI, in the mapping, that is for the project type that we just added. So I'm going to go to the setup pages here, and I'm going to go to the form to CI mapping, and here's the form that I or the CI mapping that the form to CI mapping that I've created for my project form. Here you can select the component interface that you want to use. So since we're importing data into PeopleSoft for the creation of a project, the project costing project page uses this component interface, Project General. So that's the one I'm using to import data into PeopleSoft using that component interface. The projects are stored in the project table in project costing. So I've selected that record. And then you can click on Get CI Properties, and it returns all the fields from the component interface. You also have in this case, I've set it to mode add, so we only add data. We don't update it. We only add data. So let's see here. So when you click on the Get CI Properties, it loads all the fields on the component interface. In this case, there were 122 fields being returned, but I've deleted, I've cleared the ones that I don't need and only left the ones that I do need. And as you can see here, I've mapped my form field business unit to the component interface field business unit. And I've also mapped my form field description to the Desker field on the component interface. And the same thing for the form field project end date, which is mapped to the end date in the component interface field. So in that way, you map your form fields to the fields used in the component interface in the actual database. And for the project ID, I've given a property default so that property default of next, so that the system, suppose a user doesn't enter a project ID, the system will incrementally sequence the numbering. It will use auto numbering, sequential auto numbering, and increment the numbers, the project IDs. That's a default. The user can override the default next with a project ID that they enter themselves, whether it's numeric or alphanumeric, But if they don't type anything, it will use next as the default, and it will do an incremental sequential numbering. So now let's add the project type to map it to the component interface. So I'm going to add a new row. And let's select the form field the form field project type. This is the field that we put on the form project type, and I'm gonna give it a sequential. Let me see. I'm gonna put it on the root, and I'm gonna select the field project type from the component interface. Project type, and let me give it a sequence number of 1001, for example. Let me see here. So yeah, 1001, and then let's see here. Then we will hit save. So now I have I've saved my form CI mapping, and it all looks good. Yep. So now basically we are good to go, and we can now start filling out this particular form and then submit it for approval. So let's pretend that we are an end user and we would like to fill out this particular form to have a project created in PeopleSoft. So I'm going to go back to the home page, and I'm going to click on My Forms, and I'm going to fill out a new form, project form. And then here we see the fields that I selected on the form. So the user can enter a description, project, PeopleSoft, implementation, fluid, for example. We're going to put in a business unit. We can also select it from the lookup, because we defined a lookup with a prompt record in the form. But you can also fill it in directly. Here's the next, which was the CI property default that I selected, next. I can also override it if I want to with something else, but in this case I leave it to next so that it does incremental sequential numbering. I'm going to put in a project start date, and I'm going to put in an end date and a description. Let's just put this in here. Implementation. The integration template, which is used in project costing, which is mapped to your general ledger unit. So, and then the project type is not required, but I'm just going to select one as for informational purposes. So I'm going to select it's a capital project, and let's see. So we have all the information there. We can hit save, and we can also add attachments if we want to, and then the manager or the person approving the form can view the attachments as well. So I can also view preview the approval. As you can see here, it will be routed to multiple approvers. And just to show you here, if I go, when you create and save a form, the system automatically creates the approval process definition. So that happens automatically. So if you open up the approval process definition and you type in EOFM, then you see here that when I create and save the form, it automatically creates a definition for it. And this is necessary to set up the approval process definition. And you can see that this particular process definition is specifically meant for the definition criteria, the form that I created. My form, I had called my form project_PC, and that's mentioned here. So this particular definition is only used for the approval of that particular form. And this happens automatically. This is automatically created once you create and save the form, which is referred to as the approval builder. So I've filled out the form, and let me now submit it for approval. So now the form is submitted for approval. We can click the pending approval to see that it's being routed to multiple approvers. So now let me log in as an approver in this session here. So I'm going to log in as VP2. And then we're going to go to the approval tile. And then here we see underneath forms, we see the form that I just submitted for approval, implementation fluid. And here as a manager, I can see that this is the form that was filled out by one of my staff members. It's been submitted to me for approval, and I see all the information in the form, and I'm okay with this. Let's create the project. So I'm going to click on approve, submit. Now I have approved the form. As you can see here, it's approved. And now as a manager, the last step that I have to do is post the form, which submits the data through the component interface into PeopleSoft. So once I hit this button, post form, the project will be created in PeopleSoft because the data will be imported through the component interface. We're getting a message here that the form for this unit created this project ID 294 and has been successfully posted through the transaction table or to the transaction tables through this particular component interface, which we mapped to the form. I'll click on OK. And as a manager, I can now click on the document keystring link, and then I can see the project that has been created in PeopleSoft based on the form that was filled out and submitted to me. So here we have the project 294. The numbering is done incrementally, sequentially, and we see our description that we put in the form, and we see the integration template. We see our project type that we filled out in the form, and we see the start and end date that we also filled out in the form. So all the data is there, and the project has now been created in Project Costing based on a form that was filled out by a user and submitted and approved by a manager. And as you can see, this basically concludes the demo about forms. It's a great way to automate, or to reduce the use of physical paper. And to become paperless. And also forms are a great way to use to simplify your data entry, for example, as well. And of course, as a manager, I can still go back to the home page here, and I can check my approval history because it leaves an audit trail as well. So when I click on approvals again, I can go to here and click on the approvals history, and then as a manager I can see the forms that I've approved, and here's the form that we approved today, implementation fluid. And in that way I can always go back to see my approval history chain for tracking purposes. And that basically concludes this short demo about forms in PeopleSoft.